What is the fantasy football fallout of the ruling on the Deshaun Watson suspension? Time to break it down right here and right now as we get another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. We got tons of articles up there for you now as we lead into the busy draft time here in the middle of August, all the way through kickoff in September for the regular season. So get everything you need to dominate your draft, the rankings, the tiers, the sleepers, the busts. My look at the rookie rankings, snake draft strategy. We'll have the do not draft list and the sleepers, and we'll break that down here for you on Locked On as well. And that's coming up next week here. But this week we said we're going to break down the Deshaun Watson news here. We finished our series of key questions for all 32 teams. So if you missed any of those shows, those are up. Some things are changing right now in preseason training camp, but we just finished that with the Las Vegas Raiders and Los Angeles Chargers, so check those shows out, and all your team previews are up now on the archives. Here we got to move forward with the news of the week. Deshaun Watson getting the 6-game suspension. What does that mean for you in fantasy football drafts? What do you want to do with Deshaun Watson? What does this mean for the other Browns offensive skill players through those first 6 games? And we'll examine what type of production these players can have and what games he's missing, what games he's playing. So we'll do a total deep dive into that here on today's show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right, let's start with the basics on Deshaun Watson. He was suspended for 6 games. Now, there's a chance the NFL will appeal this and push for more games. They were looking reportedly for the full season ban for Deshaun Watson. Then he would not have been available in reality or fantasy for the Browns here in 2022. He ends up with 6 games. This is in line with what Ezekiel Elliott got in 2017 in relation to domestic abuse allegations. And initially, Ben Roethlisberger got this amount in 2010. Before that was whittled down to 4 games. And part of that was just having only one accuser here, where there's multiple accusations here. It was hard to stray from that baseline of 6 games as laid out in the personal conduct policy of the NFL. So right now we're going to assume it's going to stay at 6 games with Watson. We have to do that. It's going to be a long process to see if it's going to be above that, but it's also a short period of time. He's still working with the team. He can do that in training camp in preseason. So he's still prepping for a season, and 6 games seems like the least amount he could have gotten. Everyone was looking at 6 to 8 in that range. 4 was mentioned briefly, but the full season had some momentum early in the process. He already missed all of last season. I know you look at him getting paid by the Texans and not a lot of money that he has to give up this year. No fine there. So the money didn't seem to be as important for the NFL as the time missed here for Deshaun Watson. So it ends up at 6 games. That's not insignificant for fantasy football. It equals what his former teammate, DeAndre Hopkins, is going to get for the Cardinals. So same thing you're dealing with there is how do you navigate through that, where Hopkins is pretty much set up for returning after those 6 games. I think Watson would be as well. So right now, Deshaun Watson's draft value is on the rise. He was off the board. He's at number 22, QB 22, and rising. I think he'll go not far after the traditional QB1s. That means in a 12-team league, the top 12. Anytime after that, you could see Deshaun Watson go, because there's a lot of question marks, right? When you have Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers, 2 big-time scores from last year, and they're on the fringe as QB1s because of some other rising guys, namely Trey Lance, who's snuck his way into the top 12 there in the fantasy football rankings once he was officially named the starter for the 49ers because of running ability. So a lot of running quarterbacks that we know are in that mix. Lamar Jackson, Murray, Jalen Hurts, and you go down to Lance, and then before that, you have Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, who really pad their stats with running as well. So running is definitely a key element, and Deshaun Watson has that as part of his game as well. So there's a lot of upside there when you compare him to Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers, and you can throw in Tom Brady in that mix. To some degree, Dak Prescott as well, because Prescott is a runner, but more pick his spots type runner, not a takeoff and runner. He's more adept at doing that to supplement his stats with touchdowns in the red zone. Now, Deshaun Watson can do a lot. He buys time with his legs to throw the ball downfield. He also can take off and run and have that kind of delivery. And remember this about Deshaun Watson, everything that's gone on off the field with him, on the field, he's still a highly exceptional player here. That's why he got the big contract. The Browns wanted to take care of things. That's why they wanted to take this risk and make that upgrade from Baker Mayfield. There's nothing wrong with Deshaun Watson as an on-the-field player. He's been pretty durable. He had that knee injury early in his career, but came back strong, looked pretty good here. And so 22, I think, is pretty conservative, and that's not where he's going to stay here. It's just the initial reaction, moving him up from the bottom of the QB2s into kind of the middle. That's where he's headed. So I would be shocked if he lasted 16, 17. If he was still on the board in a lot of leagues, then someone's going to take that chance. And there's a good reason for this. It's the fact that you're still going to get a good chunk of games, even if you cut off your season pretty short and you don't play the final week of the season, start your playoffs early, you're still going to get a good chunk of games from him, 9 games at least here that are going to be relevant in the fantasy football schedule from Deshaun Watson. And what you can look at is maybe do the stream game a little bit at quarterback and try to get a Carson Wentz or somebody with some decent matchups early. You look at the schedule for the Commanders, it's pretty good. And Wentz had some decent back-end QB1 numbers last year where, look, it's not going to be pretty. You're going to piecemeal it. What I would not do, however, if you're going to draft Deshaun Watson, is try to kind of stack it with another player. So that's not what I'm interested in at all. I think what you want is you want to have minimal other investment at quarterback. I don't want to have like a Jalen Hurts and Deshaun Watson. I can see it with an Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson because Rodgers has been on the fringe there as a QB1. I could go there. Or I might hedge my bets more with like a Derek Carr, a hot sleeper in that second stretch where you know you're set at quarterback either way. I did this one year where I wasn't sure about Patrick Mahomes in his second year. I was excited about his upside, but I was a little bit careful. And Andrew Luck was there, and I took Andrew Luck as a late QB1, but I took Mahomes because of upside. What happened? I started Andrew Luck, I think, during Patrick Mahomes' bye week and maybe one other week when Mahomes had a tough matchup. But in the end, Mahomes was my starter. Did I care? No, because I didn't invest too highly in either quarterback. So I waited and ended up hitting a jackpot in the Mahomes MVP second season. He carried my team, but that was just the way it worked out. But I didn't invest highly where I didn't throw away an early pick. And that can be frustrating where your QB2 looks a lot better than your QB1 all of a sudden. So I think if you're going to go Deshaun Watson, trust yourself, play the streaming game, find people with matchups early. You look at Wentz, that could be a guy that can help you early. Carr, I think, would be a higher end investment there, but you could see this schedule of particular quarterbacks. I think you also look at that range. Kirk Cousins is not a bad target as well because he's in a high upside offense. They can put up some numbers. He's a pretty strong backup as well to Watson. So I don't think it's wrong in a non-2 QB, non-superflex league to have good quarterback options and make it a high-end streaming situation versus low-end. So that way you're covered all the way. I mean, I'm thinking if you want to go really cheap, you can extract probably some value from Carson Wentz. You can maybe extract some from Matt Ryan and just say, okay, we're going to survive these first 6 games. Maybe even get a Matt Ryan, then go deeper and go into a streamer that has some nice value early this season and say you're going to piecemeal it together in those first 6 games, play the matchup, and then turn it over to Deshaun Watson. And I think that's the one good thing about Deshaun Watson here, that once he's in there, he's not a matchup-proof quarterback all the way, but he's a guy you're not going to take out of your lineup when he's playing. So one thing you also have to prepare for is when he comes back here, he's going to miss the first 6 weeks. And then 7, 8, 9, then they have a bye week. So you have to be prepared there for week 10. So make sure you consider those first 6 weeks and that bye when drafting your quarterback. And there are a lot of different options there. Or again, multiple quarterback strategy there. It's okay. Just make sure you're not over investing because it's going to take a little bit of a higher price to get Watson here in your drafts than expected. So 22 right now, I don't expect that to be the ADP or the value here overall. He's just too good. And here's why. You look at the numbers, it's a different team. I get it in Houston, but his 3 full seasons there, 18, 19, 20, we know he sat out all of last year. QB4, QB5, QB5. That's what you're getting out of Deshaun Watson. And he's just going to be the guy who eats up numbers. And why? He's just really talented. Talent is the number one thing in fantasy football. He's going to get the ball to those weapons. And you look at Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones, some of the things he has. I mean, there are some parallels between what he had with DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, and not much else. And he got it done there in Houston. So the numbers are there. That's why Watson is such a coveted entity. And DeAndre Hopkins, I can see as a similar situation, missing the first 6 games. There's reason to maybe fade him a little bit. He's getting a little bit older. There are other options at wide receiver. But you look at Watson, when he's on the field, he produces at a high level for fantasy football. And again, just have to hedge your bets a little bit. Make sure you have contingency plans, not only for those first 6 weeks, but the bye. And do you look at Jacoby Brissett? That's another question you could look at as well. Well, they play the Panthers in the first game. That's a so-so matchup. I just don't see them being a high-volume passing team or really pushing the envelope here with Brissett. They're going to be more like their formula from last year, a lot of running game and defense and work in that capacity here in 2022 to start the season. If they can survive that schedule, Panthers, Jets, Steelers, Falcons, Chargers, Patriots, it's pretty favorable. Steelers game in week 3 is pretty tough here, even at home. It's because of the defense, even though they have a quarterback situation. Falcons, a pretty easy game in week 4. Chargers, Patriots, you figure those could be losses anyway with Watson, just the way those teams are, especially the Chargers game, but the Patriots in a tough spot here. So I think right now you're looking at 3-3 or 4-2. And again, they'll be a little bit run heavier without Watson. And we'll explore that here in the next segment, the fallout for the rest of the offensive skill players on the Browns. I do have to tell you about a new sponsor here, and we're really proud to be joined up here on Locked On Fantasy Football with BetterHelp. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Talk about a time that your life threw you a curveball. I've had many of those in recent times. I recently became a parent, and it's a challenging situation. I have different things going on in my life, trying to get that work-life balance going, just like everyone else. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through it all. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Personal experience tells me that really seeking out someone to talk to on a regular basis really just kind of changes everything and puts life in a different perspective, makes it a little bit easier. And really, you can seek therapy for many reasons, but having it as a consistent part of your life really helpful. So really, BetterHelp, they're going to set you up with the right therapist, someone that is going to help you. And I really encourage you to try. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to everyone worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions so you don't have to be on camera if you don't want to. And getting therapy every week is as easy as a few clicks on your laptop or phone. With therapy, it can take a few tries to get the right fit for you. BetterHelp makes it easy, and you're free to change therapists as needed. It's also more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself. Visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional therapists in all 50 states. And I have a special offer for you, the listener to Locked On Fantasy Football, for BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P.com/lockedon. All right, it is time to continue the show looking at the fantasy football fallout of the Deshaun Watson decision here to miss the first 6 games. We focused on Watson and what you should do with him in drafts and how you manage that situation without him for those first 6 games. Let's start with those 6 games and see how the Browns would adjust. And I think you have to expect a lot of Nick Chubb and a lot of Kareem Hunt. It has to be even a bigger lean here for the Browns offense. I know with Kevin Stefanski and the system, that's what they want to do anyway. They want to run the ball, set up things downfield in the passing game. They're going to lean more of that because Jacoby Brissett is not going to be that extender of plays and as accurate throwing the ball with his big arm, and he doesn't have the arm strength, clearly, that Deshaun Watson does. So they're going to just try to manage those games. They can go into caretaker mode given that schedule I just mentioned. One team, the Chargers, is the potential for a shootout. The other game should be low scoring, maybe physical battle of attrition here with those opponents. So that means a lot of Nick Chubb. So Nick Chubb gets a little bit of a bump here. This offensive line is sturdy as ever. I mean, Joel Bitonio, Jack Conklin, Jedrick Wills. This is a very strong front here, and they can run the ball and be effective doing that. And their defense is good. So they're going to be ahead in some games, and the game script is going to be positive here for the Browns, for the most part, a lot of those games that he's missing. So Nick Chubb gets a bump up for me overall. I think Chubb would have got a bump up overall just having Watson and someone to help set up more things in the red zone to finish drives here. Chubb. I think Kareem Hunt actually gets a little of a bump early in the season. Remember, Deshaun Watson, not necessarily the best checkdown guy. I think he proved on that. But this guy wants to push the ball downfield. He's confident himself that he can roll out of the pocket, extend plays, and get the ball to anyone downfield. That's why we had that amazing chemistry with Will Fuller develop. So Kareem Hunt and the checkdowns, that's going to be more of a factor here with Jacoby Brissett. I think also David Njoku, he's going as a deep tight end too right now. I think you'll see Njoku have a little bit more value early in the season, especially as they sort out their wide receiver core beyond Amari Cooper here. So that's where we're getting to eventually with this. How does it affect Amari Cooper? Well, I think Cooper has proved to be a guy who can adjust to quarterbacks on the fly pretty nicely. I mean, he went from Derek Carr to Dak Prescott. He plays like a number one. He's a professional. He runs great routes. He has good hands. He's the clear number one here. And again, Brissett, the lesser quarterback, is going to rely upon the most seasoned receiver. So Donovan Peoples-Jones doesn't have much interest here for us early. I think he's a guy that you could look at to pick up in the second half. I think he'll have a quiet first 6 games without Watson. But yeah, DPJ, there's some parallels there to Fuller and the connection that Deshaun Watson can have. But Amari Cooper, I wouldn't say he's quarterback proof, but I think you'll have to expect a little bit lesser production from him without Watson. I think that said, I don't think it's going to drop too much more than a wide receiver 2. I think with Watson in there, Cooper has some wide receiver 1 potential to finish in the top 12 or at least in the top 15. With Brissett in there, I think you're looking at more of that solid wide receiver 2 into the 20s, maybe at the worst case scenario dips into high-end wide receiver 3. But Cooper's just too good as a number 1 receiver. There's not a lot of people to eat up the targets. There's a lot of vacated targets. So Cooper's going to be reliable because of the way he plays. I think those peripheral receivers, the downfield receivers, the big play threats, those are guys that are going to be hurt without Watson in there. And Brissett, again, is going to be a little bit more contained, short to immediate passing. That falls in the wheelhouse of Cooper and Njoku and Hunt here a little bit more. But however you look at it, Chubb is in good position. They'll lean on Chubb a little bit more. Chubb will have more opportunities there in that second half and beyond with Watson in there. So really looking forward to some of these other pieces stepping up a little bit more without Brissett in there and Watson back in that second half. Now, the schedule, again, gets a little bit tougher. We looked at that early schedule. It's pretty favorable, so that's going to help Chubb as well and Cooper produce. But then you get into some potential shootouts in the second half there. When he comes back in week 7, the Ravens, Lamar Jackson on the other side. You got Joe Burrow, the Bengals next, the Dolphins and their offense. So some high-scoring potential there with some offenses that are going to put up some points on the other side. Then you really rev that up with the Bills and the Buccaneers after the bye. Then you get to the Texans, a really good matchup there for all of the Browns offensive players. Back to the Bengals and Ravens, back-to-back, flip it, mirror image of the first 2 matchups. Then you get to the Saints. Saints a little bit tricky, but still manageable in favorable conditions. The Commanders, definitely a team that you can attack, and the Steelers close things out to end the season, and you may not even have that in season-long fantasy football if you cut off week 18. So pretty much there's good chances for big numbers here there. So a little bit more running game, short to intermediate oriented there with Brissett early. Back half of the schedule, you'll see the passing game open up. It has to, so the Browns can put up points and win those type of games in higher scoring affairs. So they might have not put up big numbers anyway offensively in the first few games. Now that's guaranteed. So curb your expectations a little bit for the passing game, but keep it high for Chubb and Hunt throughout here. And again, Hunt might be the guy that fades a little bit once Watson returns because, again, he won't trust too much or doesn't need to. He's going to extend the field. Again, Watson has improved as a check down player, but Brissett is going to be way more dependent on that aspect of the passing game here in 2022. All right, there you have a look at the Browns' fallout for the other players there with the Deshaun Watson suspension. We will get into one more topic in our final segment, and this does come up in fantasy football. Should you consider off-field feelings and moral stances in building your fantasy football team? We'll get into that to close the show. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in all your betting needs. First, you can look at all your favorite sports and events and know that you're getting the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball. Games are in full swing after the trade deadline, a lot of big matchups and a lot of changing fortunes for many teams. The NFL preseason is getting started here with the Hall of Fame game. So some action there. NBA and NHL will be back sooner than you think. Combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online source for all your sporting waiting range information from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use a mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. So we've talked about Deshaun Watson, what you should do in drafts, what's going to happen to the other players, and what we expect out of their production, both with Watson, without Watson, with Brissett in there. Well, there's one more thing we need to talk about. The allegations against Deshaun Watson are just very difficult to kind of take here, that this has happened and some of the way it went down. I know there were no criminal charges filed, but it's still hard to think about all things that Deshaun Watson was allegedly doing or accused of doing here, and these lawsuits that are being settled, the number of them above 20. It's hard to wrap our head around that a little bit, that there's someone in the NFL, and for all that, there's a 6-game suspension. Now, you have to decide, are you in fantasy football for the game aspect? Are you weighing the other things here, the moral parts of the player? Is that something important to you? I mean, we just talked about Kareem Hunt as well, and we've been using him in fantasy football there to get some points here since that ugly incident with the Chiefs that caused dismissal, rebounded with Cleveland. I think that's just a personal choice. I don't think it's wrong to say I don't want a player like Kareem Hunt, or even going back to Tyreek Hill, or looking at Deshaun Watson, or maybe you have had that stand with Ezekiel Elliott or Ben Roethlisberger for a long time now. It's okay to do that, and it's fine. And look, you're playing a game, and I get it. It's high stakes, and you're playing for yourself, and you're trying to win, and there's that. But if you're playing for fun, and you know what, I don't want to associate myself with this player on my fantasy football team, that's also fine. And it just depends on your type of league, how you feel about it, and how you feel personally, what you think of fantasy football, and how you separate it from reality football, the NFL, real life. So that's up to you. I think any decision you make there is totally fine. It's good either way. You shouldn't feel bad. Oh, I missed out on Deshaun Watson's big season because I just didn't want him on my team. Don't feel that way. And the other way is, if you're going to draft Deshaun Watson, it's okay too. It's a game. It's a part of the game. We know that injuries, serious injuries, have been part of the game for a long time. So different moral standing on when it's an off-field issue, but still something to consider there anyway. So you could go down a rabbit hole here, but again, you do your best decision with Deshaun Watson in fantasy football and live with it, and it'll be fine either way here. Again, no judgment either side on what you do with Deshaun Watson in your fantasy football drafts. All right. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On Fantasy Football and this special edition breaking down the Deshaun Watson 6-game suspension and the fallout of that for fantasy football. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen. The Locked On NFL podcast are national NFL experts and insiders. Keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal break in the action. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. See you next time as we start breaking down the latest AFC news and notes from training camp.